The first time it happened, I thought I misheard. I was standing at the front steps of the house I had poured years of savings into, my grocery bags cutting into my arms, when my mother-in-law stepped into the doorway like a guard. Her voice was sharp, her eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this house. You don't belong here." Behind her, my father-in-law muttered in agreement, arms crossed like a final barricade. For a moment, I just stood there, the weight of the words hitting harder than the bags in my hands. This wasn't some rental. This wasn't a home my husband's family had passed down. This was my house. The place I bought with my own money before I even said, "I do." Every brick, every shingle, every square foot had my name on it. And yet, in their eyes, I was nothing more than an intruder. My name is Rachel. I'm 32 years old, a contracts manager in the Midwest. I grew up with little secondhand clothes, hand-me-down furniture, and I swore that one day I'd build a life that was mine. When I bought this house, it was the proudest moment of my life. A quiet victory. But the day I married into my husband's family, that pride turned into a target. His parents had always been particular, polite smiles that never reached their eyes, compliments that felt like veiled critiques. At first, I told myself it was nerves, that I was new, that I had to earn my place. But now, standing in my own doorway, being told I didn't belong, I knew better. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just set the grocery bags down slowly, meeting my mother-in-law's glare with a calm she didn't expect. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that inside my bag wasn't just food for dinner. It was the envelope that carried the truth they had ignored for too long, the papers with my name on them, the deed that would change everything. When I first met my husband, I thought I had struck gold not in money, but in family. He was kind, thoughtful, the type of man who opened doors and remembered the little things, and I believed the warmth I felt around him would extend to the people who raised him. At first, it did. His parents smiled, asked polite questions, even told me how happy they were that their son had finally found someone serious. But those smiles faded quickly. Little things slipped through the cracks. My mother-in-law made comments about my cooking, how it wasn't the way they did it. My father-in-law asked more than once if my job was real work or just paperwork. They thought they were subtle, but I noticed. I always noticed. Still, I tried. God, I tried. I volunteered to host Christmas one year. I bent over backwards for birthdays, anniversaries, family gatherings. I thought if I gave enough, if I smiled wide enough, if I made myself useful, they would see me as family. I wanted so badly to believe that effort could erase doubt. The irony was, I didn't need their approval. I was already independent, already capable. Long before marriage, I had worked myself to the bone, saving every dollar, fighting for promotions at work. And at 28, I bought the house. My house. My little piece of stability in a world that had offered me none growing up. But I never flaunted it. When my husband moved in after we married, I didn't make a show of whose name was on the deed. I wasn't trying to win points. It was our home now, and I wanted it to feel like ours, not mine. So I stayed quiet, let people assume. And his parents assumed exactly what I expected, that their son had provided it, that I was just lucky to live under his roof. I should have corrected them. I should have spoken up. But I didn't. I thought, what's the harm in letting them believe it? The harm came later, in whispers I wasn't meant to hear. His mother saying, "One day, when this house is passed down, it'll stay in the family where it belongs." His father nodding, certain of a future, that erased me completely. And I sat there, smiling tightly, telling myself they didn't mean it, that they'd come around. That if I kept working, kept showing them I belonged, their words would soften. But respect doesn't grow out of silence, and love doesn't erase entitlement. Looking back, I realize I gave them permission to treat me like a guest in my own home. Every time I swallowed their remarks, every time I stayed quiet instead of correcting them, I handed them more ground to stand on. What I didn't know then was that their belief in that lie that this was theirs or their son's would one day drive them to overstep so badly they'd leave me no choice but to show them the truth. It started with little intrusions that felt harmless at first. My mother-in-law would stop by unannounced, rearranging the furniture in the living room because it would look better this way. My father-in-law walked around the yard, pointing out what needed fixing, as if he were the one paying for repairs. I'd come home from work to find curtains swapped out or cabinets reorganized, and when I looked confused, they'd just shrug and say, "We're family. We're helping." At first, I let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that they were just excited, maybe even trying to bond. But then they began inviting guests into my house without asking. I'd come back to find neighbors in my kitchen, wine glasses out, my in-laws acting like the hosts. I laughed awkwardly, but inside, something twisted. The worst part wasn't the actions themselves, but the words I overheard when they thought I wasn't listening. One evening, as I passed by the den, I heard my father-in-law say, "One day this house will be ours to manage." "She won't last forever." My mother-in-law replied with a laugh that felt like a dagger. "She doesn't belong here. She's just passing through." I froze in the hallway, my chest tight, my heart pounding, so hard I could barely hear. Passing through, like I was some temporary tenant in the life I had built. When I told my husband about it, he sighed, rubbed the back of his neck, and said, "They don't mean it like that. They see the house as part of the family." He didn't understand, or maybe he didn't want to, but I understood perfectly. They weren't talking about family. They were talking about ownership, control. So I stayed quiet, but I paid attention. Every smirk, every joke about how I should be grateful, every little power play they pulled in what they thought was their space. I noticed, and I remembered. And slowly, the truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was entitlement. They weren't waiting for me to belong. They were waiting for me to disappear. I'd walk into a room and feel their eyes on me, sharp and measuring, as if calculating how much longer until the balance tipped in their favor. My things began disappearing from common areas, a photo frame tucked away, a throw blanket replaced with one of theirs. I started to feel like a shadow in my own home. There was a moment, just a small one, when my mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye while pouring tea and said, "Houses carry history. They tell you who truly belongs." I smiled back, but inside I wanted to scream, because I knew what she was really saying. This house doesn't tell your story, it tells ours. They thought their whispers and little games were subtle. They thought I'd stay quiet forever. What they didn't know was that every move they made was only setting the stage for me to end the game entirely. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that should have been simple. I had been out running errands, bags of groceries in the back seat, thinking about dinner plans with my husband. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange: boxes stacked by the front door, some of them half filled with my things. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe we were donating, maybe my husband was cleaning. But when I stepped closer, I saw framed photos of me and him, my books, even my grandmother's quilt shoved carelessly into cardboard. My heart dropped. That's when the door swung open. My mother-in-law stood there, her face sharp with something I can only describe as satisfaction. "You need to stay out of this house," she snapped, blocking the doorway like she owned it. "You don't belong here." Behind her, my father-in-law added, "We're making this clear now before things get messy." His arms were folded across his chest like a final verdict. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked past them into the living room, my living room, where pieces of my life had been pushed into corners, displaced, erased. My husband stood off to the side, silent, his face caught between discomfort and cowardice. He didn't step forward. He didn't defend me. I wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, but nothing came out. Instead, I felt this eerie calm settle over me, like a storm pulling itself together before it breaks. I bent down, set my grocery bags neatly on the porch, and straightened slowly. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't ask why, because I already knew why. To them, I was never supposed to be permanent, and for the first time, I stopped trying to prove otherwise. While they sneered, waiting for me to turn around and walk away, I slid my hand into my bag. My fingers brushed the edge of an envelope I had tucked there days earlier, almost by instinct. They thought they were pushing me out. What they didn't know was that inside that envelope lay the truth they could never erase. Long before that Saturday afternoon, I had learned one lesson the hard way. Silence only protects people who think they can take advantage of you. So, while my in-laws whispered about the future and treated me like a guest in my own home, I was busy making sure I had the kind of protection they couldn't touch. The house was mine before the marriage. I had closed on it with my own savings, signed every line of that deed with my own hand. But I didn't just stop there. I updated the records after the wedding, had a lawyer friend walk me through every page, every clause, every right that belonged to me alone. My name sat on every official paper like a quiet shield, waiting for the day I might need it. And I kept everything organized copies in a safe at the bank, files on my computer, and one clean, certified copy folded neatly in an envelope I carried whenever I sensed the tension building. Maybe some part of me knew this moment would come, that one day they'd overstep so badly I'd have to stop being quiet. When they pushed, I was ready. I didn't brag about it. I didn't even tell my husband the full extent of what I'd prepared. I wasn't interested in winning arguments. I was interested in being untouchable. There were times when I questioned myself. When my husband brushed off his parents' comments, I wondered if I was overreacting. But every time I heard them talk about our house, as if I were a stranger, I reminded myself, this wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. They thought their son gave me this life. They thought the house was his to share, his to grant. They had no idea that long before he ever carried a key, I had unlocked the front door myself. So when my mother-in-law snarled, "Stay out of this house," and my father-in-law folded his arms like a king defending his castle, I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply thought of the papers waiting in my bag, because those papers were more than ink on parchment. They were proof that their power ended the second I chose to stand up. They believed I was powerless because I'd stayed quiet. They believed their entitlement was stronger than my silence. What they didn't realize was that while they were plotting, I had already secured every inch of ground they thought they stood on. I had the deed, and soon they were going to see it with their own eyes. The doorway felt like a battlefield. My mother-in-law's voice still echoed in my ears, sharp and final. "Stay out of this house." My father-in-law stood behind her like a wall of stone, certain that their words carried the weight of truth. My husband hovered awkwardly to the side, his silence louder than any accusation. I bent down, set my grocery bags aside, and slipped the envelope from my purse. It was thin, almost ordinary looking, but it carried the kind of power no insult could touch. My fingers smoothed the flap as I met their eyes. "You want me out of this house?" I said quietly. "Then maybe you should see who it actually belongs to." I pulled out the folded sheets, crisp and official, and held them up between us. Their confidence faltered for the first time. My father-in-law frowned, squinting. My mother-in-law scoffed, though I caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. "This," I continued, unfolding the papers with deliberate calm, "is the property deed. You know what a deed is, don't you? It says who owns this house, whose name is written on every line." The silence grew heavy. Even my husband stepped closer, his eyes darting to the bold letters across the top. And then I read it aloud. My name. Clear. Permanent. Unmistakable. The room shifted. The smugness drained from their faces like water slipping through cupped hands. My mother-in-law's jaw tightened, her lips trembling as if searching for a retort that wouldn't come. My father-in-law's shoulders sagged, the authority in his posture collapsing under the weight of reality. For years, they had dismissed me as a guest, an outsider, a placeholder. In a single moment, I had stripped away the illusion they built their arrogance on. I lowered the papers slowly, holding them against my chest like a shield. "This is my house," I said steady and firm. "You are guests here, nothing more, and guests who threaten the owner don't get to stay." The words landed like a gavel. My husband didn't speak. His parents stared at me, caught between outrage and humiliation, but neither dared to step forward. They couldn't. Not anymore. The silence stretched, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fill it. I just stood there, calm, certain, untouchable. Some neighbors walking by slowed their steps, curious at the scene on the porch. One of my cousins, who happened to be visiting, lingered near the driveway, phone in hand, capturing enough to make it real if anyone dared to twist the story later. My in-laws must have seen them too, because their faces paled further. This wasn't just a private defeat, it was a public one. I tucked the deed back into its envelope, slid it into my purse, and lifted the grocery bags once more. Without asking permission, without hesitation, I stepped past them and into my house. My house. They didn't follow. They couldn't. Behind me, I heard my mother-in-law whisper something sharp and bitter, but it was thin, hollow, powerless. For the first time since marrying into this family, I wasn't the one being pushed aside. They were. And as the door closed behind me, sealing them out, I felt the quiet satisfaction of truth settling into place. They had wanted me gone. Instead, they were the ones left standing in the cold. The days after that confrontation felt strangely quiet. My in-laws didn't come by unannounced anymore. The phone that used to buzz with their suggestions and little demands fell silent. For once, there was no knocking at the door, no voices claiming space that wasn't theirs. At first, the silence felt like victory. But then it became something else. Peace. A peace I hadn't realized I'd been craving for years. My husband struggled with it. He had grown up under their shadow, their voices louder than his own, and for grown up to. A while, he didn't know what to say. But slowly, I saw it in him too, the relief of boundaries finally drawn. It took time and a few hard conversations, but even he admitted that the line I drew was long overdue. What surprised me most were the quiet acknowledgments from others. A cousin who had witnessed the moment told me later, "I've never seen anyone stand up to them like that." A neighbor slipped a note into my mailbox. "Good for you. That house looks like yours, not theirs." Those little validations mattered more than I expected. They reminded me I hadn't just defended myself, I had told the truth out loud, and the truth had weight. For years, I thought being part of a family meant enduring slights, swallowing pride, proving myself over and over again. But family isn't about control. It isn't about ownership. It's about respect. And when respect isn't there, you don't owe anyone your silence. They tried to strip me of my place. They thought if they shouted loud enough, I'd back away. Instead, I showed them the one thing they couldn't erase my name, printed in black and white, unshakable, undeniable. I don't know if my in-laws will ever fully forgive me for embarrassing them, but the truth is, I don't need their forgiveness. I needed my freedom. I needed my home to feel like mine again. And now, it does. They once told me to stay out of this house, but it was never theirs to keep me from. It was mine all along. And finally, they know it. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that standing your ground matters, and subscribe for more true stories of justice and resilience. Every week, I bring you real battles fought in silence and the strength it takes to win them. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and I'll see you in the next story.